I still remember the smell of red dirt in Austin back in '72, mixed with wet concrete from the endless construction sites. The two-room shack in Round Rock where I lived with Uncle Jim was cramped with 5 men, but nobody complained. Early mornings at 3 o'clock, when the stars were still bright across that big Texas sky, I'd pedal my bike down rough dirt roads, a basket of warm bread swinging from the handlebars. The transistor radio on my bike told stories about the Vietnam War, about Watergate, about an America in transition. Austin back then was just a lively college town, not the tech city it is today. And me, a 16-year-old kid from rural Ohio, carrying inside me a true story about a life with 6 children, including Jason, the son who carried darkness in his heart. If you are listening from anywhere in the world, please leave a comment and subscribe, because there are truths that need to be spread, no matter how they may shake what you believe. There are stories, however painful, that must be told. I arrived in Austin in 1972, coming from a small town in rural Ohio with just the shirt on my back, as they say. I was 16 and full of grit. The capital was still young, just a booming college town, but it was already buzzing with people from all over the country, looking for a better life. I came because my Uncle Jim was already here and said there was work for everyone. In this new city, whoever gets here early and works hard will make it, Elliot. He promised me in a letter, and I believed him. I only brought a single cardboard suitcase with 2 changes of clothes, a few treasured items that belonged to my mother, and a lot of hope. At first, I lived with my uncle in a small shack in Round Rock, which at the time was still considered a satellite town. The shack had only 2 rooms, and we shared it with 3 other guys from back home. We slept on mats on the floor, but nobody complained. We were all in the same boat. My first job was as a laborer on the construction sites that never stopped. Austin was that. Dust, concrete, and a lot of sweat. I worked at that for about 2 years, but I never really got the hang of it. My skinny frame didn't help. I've always been on the lean side. It was by chance that I found my true path. One day, helping out at the bakery where we bought our bread, the owner, Mr. Henderson, a gruff but kind-hearted man, offered me a better job. "Son, you don't have the build for construction, do you? You want to deliver bread? You're already up early, and you'll earn a little more." And just like that, I became a bread delivery boy. I'd wake up at 3 a.m., help organize the batches, and head out with a huge basket hanging from the handlebars of the bicycle Mr. Henderson lent me. At first, I only delivered in Round Rock, but soon I was covering Pflugerville too, the smell of that warm bread in the chilly Austin morning. My God, that's priceless. To this day, when I smell bread baking, I go back to that time. The sky still dark, the stars shining bright, like they only do on the Texas plains, and me, pedaling through the dirt roads with my breath making little puffs of smoke in the cold air. The work was hard, but I liked it. People knew me, they treated me well. "Here comes the bread boy," they'd say. In a short time I had a loyal customer base, and it was on one of those deliveries that I met my Margaret. She worked as a housekeeper for a family in a more organized part of Round Rock. She always woke up early to get the bread. A serious girl, of few words, but with a smile that could light up the darkest morning. "You always come at the right time, sir," she'd say, without looking me in the eye. At the time, I thought it was funny she called me sir, since I was probably only a couple of years older than her. It took me 3 months to work up the courage to ask Margaret to get a soda with me after my shift. She accepted, but only if it was on a Sunday, her only day off, and she even brought a friend along as a chaperone. That's how it was back then. A respectable girl didn't go out alone. We got married in '74, in a simple ceremony at the Little St. Joseph the Worker Church. I had managed to rent a small place just for us, tiny but decent, and I was no longer working for Mr. Henderson. I had bought my own bicycle and was dealing directly with 2 bakeries, making deliveries on my own. I earned a little more, enough to support a growing family. Our first son, Michael, was born in 1976. The next year, in '77, came Claire, followed by Paul in '79, Frank in '80, and Rose in '81. Finally, in 1982, Jason was born. 6 children, a full house. I worked harder than ever to provide for them. It was around this time that I started not just delivering, but also selling bread and pastries I'd buy from the bakeries and resell, expanding my route. Before the sun was up, I was out with my loaded bicycle, riding through the streets that were gradually being paved. My transistor radio was always with me, tied to the handlebars. That's how I followed the end of the Vietnam War, the Watergate scandal, the Reagan years, the Challenger disaster, all of it, listening while I pedaled. The history of America was passing through my ears while I was building my own history, one loaf of bread at a time, day after day. In '88, I managed to buy my first vehicle, a used white Ford Econoline van which I named Gertie. It was a revolution for my business. Now I could carry much more product and go farther. I started supplying small convenience stores and delis. I even bought a t-shirt and had Elliot's Baked Goods embroidered on it. It was my uniform. I wore it with pride. Life wasn't easy with 6 mouths to feed, but we managed. Margaret was a strong woman, the kind that doesn't bend in the face of hardship. She took care of the house, the kids, and still did sewing on the side, doing small repairs and alterations for the neighbors. Money was tight, but there was always food on the table. Our house improved little by little. From the initial shack, we managed to buy a lot and build 2 rooms with cinder blocks, then another and another. I built it with my own hands on weekends and holidays. Every brick in that house has a bit of my sweat on it. The kids grew up fast, healthy, and smart. Michael, the oldest, soon started helping me with deliveries. Claire looked after the younger siblings while Margaret sewed. We were united, or at least I thought we were. Because you see, in the midst of all the struggle, all the work, all the joy of seeing the family grow and life getting a little better, there was something that unsettled me. Something in my son Jason's eyes, right from the start. Jason was always different from the others. I know that now. Back then we didn't really understand, and at first we even thought it was a blessing to have such a calm boy. The other 5 were a handful, cried a lot, not Jason. Around the age of 2 we started noticing things that intrigued us. While his older siblings were affectionate and sought our laps for comfort, Jason didn't like hugs or kisses and didn't seem to miss physical contact. He learned to talk at the right age, but his words were always direct, without the sweetness and spontaneity typical of young children. I remember when he got a wooden toy car. The other boys would play by pushing it, making engine noises. Jason took the car, turned it upside down, and watched the wheels spin for a long time, with a concentration that seemed unusual for his age. There was no smile, no other expression on his face, just a fixed, intense stare. Our neighbors would even comment, "What a well-behaved boy, Elliot." But Margaret was already expressing her worries more often. "He doesn't interact like the other kids, Elliot. It's like he lives in his own world." I tried to downplay it, saying that every child has their own pace, but that look, from a very young age, Jason had a look that made me uncomfortable. It was as if he was observing us, analyzing us, without the innocence you expect from such a young child. It was around the age of 4 that the first incident happened that truly unsettled me. We had a mutt named Buddy, who was the joy of the kids. One day, I came home and found Buddy limping, with an injured paw. I asked the children what had happened. "Jason did it," said Rose, who was only 5 at the time. "He was poking Buddy with a sharp stick. I called the boy over and asked him why he'd done that. He looked me straight in the eye, something few children do when caught misbehaving, and answered with a chilling calmness. I wanted to see if he bled like we do. A shiver went down my spine. It wasn't just what he said, but how he said it without guilt, without fear, as if he were commenting on the weather. Margaret gave him a spanking, one of those old-fashioned ones. He cried, apologized, promised he'd never do it again. But as I comforted him afterward, I noticed he seemed to be just mimicking what he thought he was supposed to do. The tears dried up instantly the moment Margaret left the room. After that, other incidents occurred. We'd find dead insects carefully arranged in boxes under his bed, butterflies with their wings torn off, ants without legs. When questioned, he'd say he was studying how they worked. At school, complaints started to surface. Jason was extremely intelligent. He learned to read at 5, even before starting kindergarten. But his teacher, Mrs. Davis, called us in for a talk because he had worrying behaviors. "He's very smart, Mr. Elliot, but he doesn't play with the other children. He just watches them, as if he's studying them. And when he does play, he always wants to be in charge. to set rules that only benefit him. More serious was when a mother came to complain that her son had come home with a cut on his hand, saying Jason had done it with a pair of small scissors during art class. When confronted, my son denied it with such conviction, with such an honest look, that even I almost believed him. "He's lying," the teacher said. "I didn't see it happen, but other students confirmed it." The strangest thing was how he could charm adults. The same teacher who complained about his behavior also said he was extremely polite and helpful. "He helps me organize the classroom, always offers to help. He has manners the others don't. I just don't understand how he can be so different with his peers." At home, the contrast was even more stark. With visitors, especially adults, Jason was the most adorable boy in the world. He'd talk, smile, ask intelligent questions that impressed everyone. "What a smart boy you have, Elliot. He's going to go far." But when the visitors left, he would revert to that distant, cold child who seemed to care about no one. With his siblings, the relationship was complicated. Michael, the oldest, was almost 10 when Jason started showing these strange behaviors. He sensed something was wrong and tried to protect the younger ones. "Dad, Jason is taking Rose's things and hiding them just to watch her cry," he told me once. When I confronted Jason, he said it was Paul, the third son, and did it with such confidence, with so many details, that Paul ended up taking the blame. We only found out the truth later, when Michael found the toys under Jason's mattress. The most frightening thing was his ability to manipulate his siblings. He could convince them to do wrong things but never got directly involved. He'd watch from a distance, as if it were an experiment. One time Frank, the fourth son, broke Margaret's favorite vase. Crying, he confessed that Jason had told him that if he threw the vase up, he would catch it before it fell. Of course, he didn't catch it. He just watched his brother get punished with a little smirk on his face. I remember one night, Jason was about 6. I woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, and, on my way back to the bedroom, I saw a small silhouette standing in the hallway. It was him, standing motionless at our bedroom door, just watching. I asked him what he was doing there. "Just wanted to watch you sleep," he replied in that overly calm voice. I told Margaret about it the next day, and it gave her the creeps. She said she had woken up other times and found him like that, observing. We started locking our bedroom door at night. We tried everything, talks, punishments, even a few spankings when the situation was serious. Nothing seemed to truly work. He would learn to behave better for a while, but he always went back to the disturbing behaviors. We turned to the church. Pastor Johnson said the boy needed more discipline, more involvement in church activities. Margaret took him every Sunday, put him in Sunday school. Jason behaved perfectly in those environments. He was polite, participated, was even affectionate with the younger children. The Sunday school teachers adored him. "What a blessing of a boy you have," they'd say, while we smiled awkwardly, knowing it was just a mask. Time passed, and we adapted. We learned to deal with Jason's peculiarities. Margaret watched him more closely. I tried to spend more time with him, to teach him values. The older siblings understood they needed to keep an eye on him when he was with the younger ones. There were days when he seemed like a normal child. He played, laughed, even showed affection. That gave us hope. Maybe it's just a phase, we thought. It'll pass when he grows up. It didn't pass. It just changed form, adapted. Jason learned to hide his strange behaviors better, to be more discreet, and we, partly out of exhaustion, partly out of hope, began to accept this new normal. Until when he was 11, the greatest tragedy of our family occurred, a tragedy that would reveal once and for all that my son's problem was much deeper than we had imagined. Margaret was always a strong woman. While I was out selling bread on the streets of Austin, she was raising 6 kids, taking care of the house, and doing sewing on the side. She never complained about being tired, even when I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. "We have to set an example for the boys," she'd say. "Show them that in life you don't just choose what's easy." So when she started complaining of chest pains, I knew it was serious. Margaret wasn't one to complain for no reason. At first she tried to hide it, drinking herbal teas, using old home remedies her mother had taught her, but the pain only got worse. One night, I woke up to find her sitting up in bed, struggling to breathe. "Elliot," "I think I need to go to the hospital," she said in a weak voice I'd never heard before. I called Michael, who was 17 by then, to stay with the younger kids, and I took her to the county hospital. The emergency room was packed, as always. We waited for hours. When they finally saw her, the doctor barely looked at her, listened to her chest quickly, prescribed something for heartburn, and sent her home. "Doctor, my wife is in a lot of pain." "It's not heartburn," I insisted. "Look, sir, I've got people dying in here and I have to attend to them. It could be anxiety, stress. She has a lot of kids, right? It's normal to feel that." We went home. The medicine helped a little, but the pain was still there. In the following days, I took her to 2 more hospitals. One said it was a muscle problem. The other said it was trapped gas. They prescribed more medicines that did nothing. It was Claire, our oldest daughter, who insisted we take her to a private doctor. We pooled our money. Each of the older kids chipped in, as many of them were already working to help out. We managed to get an appointment with a cardiologist who had an office near downtown. Only then, more than a month after the first pains, did we find out that Margaret had a serious heart problem. The doctor ordered a battery of tests, and when he saw the results, he was direct. "Mrs. Elliott needs heart surgery urgently. She has a heart valve that isn't working properly." Our world came crashing down. Heart surgery. How were we going to pay for that? The doctor advised us to apply for Medicaid. He explained it was her right, but warned that the waiting list was long. "We don't have time for the list," he said with a sincerity I appreciated, even though he was delivering such harsh news. The ideal would be to operate soon. The following weeks were a bureaucratic nightmare. We went from hospital to hospital with the test results under our arm, begging for help, for a spot on the surgery list. Margaret got worse. She could no longer do housework. She'd get tired just walking from the kitchen to the bedroom. Some days, she didn't get out of bed. The children took turns caring for her. I cut back on my deliveries to be home more. Money got tighter, but everyone understood her health was the priority. Jason, who was 11 at the time, acted strangely throughout this process. While the other siblings cried and worried, he seemed merely curious. He'd ask for details about the disease, about how the heart worked, but he never showed any concern for his mother herself. "Is her heart going to stop beating?" he asked once, in a tone so casual it scared me, as if he were asking for the time. Finally, after a long struggle, we got a spot for the surgery. It would be at the county hospital in a month. The relief was enormous. It felt like we finally had a light at the end of the tunnel. Margaret even improved a little with the news. Hope gave her strength. But we didn't have that month. One Wednesday evening, we were having dinner when Margaret suddenly stood up from the table, clutched her chest, and collapsed. I rushed to help her. I screamed for help. Michael was already calling 911. The ambulance took almost an hour to arrive. When it finally showed up, the paramedics did what they could, but it was too late. Margaret passed away right there in our living room, in my arms, before we could even get to the hospital. I have no words to describe what I felt. It's like a part of me died with her. We were all in a state of shock. The neighbors came over, helped with the arrangements. I could barely speak, barely stand. The wake was held in our house, as was the custom. Relatives we hadn't seen in years showed up. The 5 children were devastated, each showing their grief in their own way. Michael, always the strong one, now took care of everything, talking to people, making arrangements. Claire couldn't stop crying. Paul went mute, didn't speak for days. Frank and Rose just hugged each other in a corner. And Jason? Jason was like a spectator. He watched everything with attentive eyes, but with no emotion at all. He even asked why people were staring at the casket so much, and why the adults were whispering. He didn't shed a single tear. Things only got worse on the day of the wake. I spilled coffee on my shirt and went to the bedroom to change. That's when my sister Joan burst in. "Elliot, come quick, for God's sake." I ran after her to the backyard. There, hidden behind the washing machine, were Jason and a second cousin, about 3 years younger than him. The two were laughing, and Jason was imitating someone fainting and falling, making fun of his own mother's death. I was paralyzed for a moment, unable to believe what I was seeing. Then, a rage I had never felt before took over me. I grabbed Jason by the arm with force and dragged him inside. The boy didn't even flinch. He didn't seem to feel fear or remorse for what he'd done. "Why are you mad, Dad? We were just playing," he said. "Playing? Your mother is dead, and you're making jokes about it? What is wrong with you, boy?" That's when he said those words that were burned into my soul forever. "She's dead. Crying isn't going to bring her back. Why is everyone pretending to be sad? Pretending." He thought our suffering was a performance. In that moment, I felt a chasm open up between me and my son. It was as if I were looking at a stranger. I hit him hard. I was so ashamed of his actions, my only reaction was violence. After we buried Margaret, the hardest phase of my life began. Being a father and mother to 6 children, continuing to work, dealing with my own grief, everything felt too heavy, impossible. The older ones helped a lot. Michael and Claire worked and contributed to the expenses. We all took care of the house, but the pain of loss affected everyone deeply. Everyone, except Jason. In the weeks following the funeral, while the house was steeped in sadness, he continued his life as normal, as if nothing had happened. He went to school, did his homework, never mentioned his mother, never asked about her. One night, about a month after Margaret's death, I found Jason in her old room, going through her drawers. "What are you doing in here, boy?" "Looking for Mom's things we can sell," he replied, matter-of-factly. "You said we need money." I went cold. It wasn't just the coldness of wanting to sell his mother's belongings so soon. It was the practical, calculating tone in an 11-year-old. From that moment on, I started watching my son with different eyes. I could no longer ignore that there was something profoundly different about him. It wasn't just a childish phase. It was something more, something I didn't understand, but that scared me more and more. And it was in this context of pain, loss, and confusion that the most difficult phase of our relationship began. In the first few months after the funeral, we reorganized our routine. Claire, at 16, took on many of the household responsibilities. She dropped a typing class she had started and began taking care of her younger siblings full-time. I cut back on my deliveries a bit, but I couldn't stop completely. It was our livelihood. The Ford van, Gertie, ran less, but it still put food on the table. Going to work had a bitter taste. Now, every time I left, I felt like I was abandoning my children, even though I knew it was necessary. After a few months, I started getting calls from the school. Jason was having problems, not academic problems. He was always smart, learned everything easily. The problem was his behavior with other students. One day, I was called in urgently by the principal. When I got there, I found Jason sitting in a chair with a bored expression and a boy crying in the next room with a cut on his arm. "Mr. Elliot," began the principal, Principal Thompson, in a grave tone. "Jason injured his classmate with a compass during math class." I looked at my son, who held my gaze without showing any guilt. "It was an accident," he said, but there was something in his voice, a lack of emotion, that told me it wasn't true. "The other students said he did it on purpose," the principal continued. "It seems the boy refused to lend Jason an eraser." "They're lying," Jason replied promptly. "I wouldn't hurt someone over an eraser. I'm not stupid." The most disturbing thing wasn't the possibility that he had attacked his classmate. Kids fight, it happens. It was the calmness with which he lied, the total absence of guilt or remorse. Later, at home, when I tried to have a serious talk about what happened, he stuck to the same story, without wavering for a second. Weeks later, another student's mother showed up at our door, furious. Her son had come home without his Game Boy, which was all the rage back then. She swore Jason had stolen it. When I confronted my son, he denied it with such conviction that I almost believed him. But the woman's certainty made me search his room, and there it was, the game, hidden inside an old sock. "Why did you take this, Jason?" I asked, holding the device in front of him. He looked at the game, then at me, and shrugged. "I wanted it, and he wouldn't let me borrow it." "That's stealing, son. It's wrong. Do you understand that?" "I understand it's wrong to get caught," he replied without hesitation. That answer left me speechless. What does a father say to a son who thinks like that? Time went on, and my worry only grew. After Margaret's death, Jason was becoming known at school and in the neighborhood for the trouble he caused. Another time, the school sent a note asking me to come in urgently. When I arrived, the scene was serious. The counselor and the principal received me with grave expressions. "Mr. Elliot, we found this in Jason's backpack. A classmate said he's been threatening him with it," said Principal Thompson, placing a considerable-sized pocket knife on the table. My heart almost stopped. "He brought this to school? Why?" "He says it was for an art project, but there's no project that would justify bringing something like this." The counselor, Miss Miller, an experienced woman who must have seen it all in her career, looked at me with a mixture of pity and concern. "Mr. Elliot, we understand the family has gone through a difficult time with the loss of your wife, but Jason's behavior goes beyond what we consider normal, even in a grieving process. He has shown worrying tendencies." "What kind of tendencies?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "Calculated aggression, manipulation, a lack of empathy for his peers in situations of suffering, petty theft, elaborate lies, and a disturbing ability to appear absolutely normal and charming when he wants to." She paused and added, "Frankly, we believe he needs professional help, psychological help." I left the school with the weight of the world on my shoulders. A psychologist? Where was I going to get money for that? We could barely pay the basic bills. And even if I could, what kind of psychologist would take on a child like Jason? It was Michael who suggested looking for a mental health service connected to the local clinic. "It says in the paper they have these free services, Dad." He showed me in an article. "I think they call it CMHC. After several attempts and a lot of red tape, we got an appointment at the Community Mental Health Center. At this time, Jason was 13. The psychologist who saw us, Dr. Scott, was young but seemed competent. She interviewed Jason first, then spoke with me. "Mr. Elliot, your son is extremely intelligent and articulate for his age," she began, which didn't surprise me. "But I'm concerned about some patterns of behavior he exhibits." "What kind of patterns?" I asked, already imagining the answer. "He shows characteristics consistent with what we call conduct disorder, which is quite serious. There's a significant difficulty in feeling empathy, in following social rules, and a pattern of manipulation that is uncommon for his age." "Is there treatment, doctor?" She hesitated a bit. "There are approaches that can help. Behavioral therapy, setting very clear boundaries, consistent consequences for inappropriate behavior. In some cases, medication might be indicated, but we would need an evaluation from a child psychiatrist." I nodded, trying to absorb all that information. "Mr. Elliot," she continued with a grave expression, "I want to be very clear with you. Children with this profile, if they don't receive proper intervention, can develop very serious problems in adulthood. More severe antisocial behaviors, difficulties maintaining jobs or relationships, even involvement with crime." I left that consultation with a heavy heart. How would Margaret have handled this? She was always firmer, more decisive. I felt lost, not knowing what to do. We followed the psychologist's instructions as best we could. Jason started weekly therapy. At home, we established clearer rules with immediate consequences for bad behavior. His older siblings helped me maintain consistency. For a while, it seemed to work. Jason was more controlled, less problematic. But it was as if he were just learning to hide his behaviors better, to be more discreet, more calculating. "He's getting better, isn't he?" I asked Rose hopefully after a few weeks without incidents. My daughter looked at me with a wisdom beyond her years. "Dad, he's just getting smarter. Now he plans better so he doesn't get caught." And she was right. It didn't take long for us to realize that the problems were still there, just in more subtle forms. And so we continued, day after day, in a constant struggle to try to understand and help a son who seemed to be made of a different material than the rest of us. The year 2000 arrived with all the fuss about the new millennium, and more than turning a century, I wanted to turn the page on the problems with Jason. He was 18 now. The therapy at the CMHC continued, but with limited results. Dr. Scott was doing what she could, but Jason was a difficult case. He attended the sessions, answered the questions, did the proposed exercises, but it all seemed to be just an act. "Mr. Elliot," the doctor told me after a session, "Jason is very good at saying what he thinks we want to hear. He perfectly understands what is socially acceptable. He just doesn't see a reason to follow those rules when there are no immediate consequences." A meeting with the multidisciplinary team at the CMHC brought up a possibility that worried me even more: antisocial personality disorder. But they said the diagnosis couldn't be formally given before the age of 18. For now, the official diagnosis remained conduct disorder. Once, I got a call. Jason was involved in a cheat sheet selling scheme at school. He didn't make the cheat sheets. He was too smart to risk it that way. Instead, he charged other students to provide the answers he somehow obtained. "Dad, they're accusing me because I'm too smart," he said. "They think the only way I can get good grades is by cheating." The truth is, Jason really was intelligent. His teachers always commented on his ability to learn quickly, his sharp reasoning. If he used his potential for good, he could have a bright future, but something inside him always pushed him to the wrong side. After that incident, I decided to seek more help. The public system had its limitations, and I felt we needed something more. That's when Claire, who was now engaged and working as a receptionist at a doctor's office, gave me news that seemed like a light at the end of the tunnel. "Dad," I talked to one of the doctors at the office about Jason. He recommended a psychiatrist who sees patients at the public hospital for a more affordable price. "I think we should try." We pooled some money. Me, Michael, Claire, and Pauland managed to book an appointment. Dr. Evans was a middle-aged man with a serious and experienced demeanor. He spent almost 2 hours evaluating Jason. Then he spoke with me separately. "Mr. Elliot, I'm going to be frank with you," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Your son presents a worrying picture. These behaviors you describe, this lack of empathy, this constant manipulation, the absence of remorse, are classic signs of what we call psychopathy." That word hit me like a ton of bricks. Psychopathy, like in horror movies, like in the news about killers. Seeing my expression, the doctor continued, "Understand, Mr. Elliot, psychopathy isn't necessarily like what they show in the movies. It's a spectrum of behaviors, and there are different degrees. Not every psychopath becomes a violent criminal. Many live seemingly normal lives, though they tend to cause suffering to those close to them due to their inability to form genuine emotional bonds." "Doctor, what can we do?" I asked, feeling a mix of desperation and relief at finally having a name for my son's problem. "Unfortunately, there is no cure for psychopathy. There's no medicine that can make a person develop empathy or a moral conscience if they were born without that capacity. What we can do is try to control the most problematic behaviors, establish very clear limits, create a structured environment." He prescribed a medication to control Jason's impulsivity and advised me to continue with behavioral therapy. But his final words were etched in my mind. "Mr. Elliot, prepare yourself for a difficult journey. Your son will probably never be like the others. The important thing is to protect him from himself and to protect others from him." We went home with a prescription and an even heavier heart. How do you explain to a teenager that he has something wrong with his brain that prevents him from feeling what others feel? We decided not to use the word psychopathy with Jason. We just explained that he had a behavioral disorder, that he needed treatment, just like someone with diabetes needs insulin. He agreed to take the medication without much resistance, perhaps realizing he had no choice. For a few weeks, there seemed to be an improvement. He was calmer, less prone to angry outbursts. But we soon discovered he was just pretending to take the pills, hiding them under his tongue and then spitting them out later. We tried everything. Making him take them in front of us, checking his mouth, then crushing the pills and mixing them with juice. But Jason always found a way to cheat. It was around this time that we decided to seek spiritual help. Since my wife passed, I hadn't set foot in church. We had always been Christians, but not very devout. I decided we would start attending church regularly. Pastor Johnson, a kind and understanding man, tried to get close to him. "This boy doesn't need spankings, Mr. Elliot," the pastor told me when I mentioned the problems. "He needs love, limits, and a lot of prayer." Between medications he didn't take properly, therapies that had limited effect, and many prayers, the years went by. Jason went through his teenage years like a tornado, leaving a trail of problems wherever he went. He would run away from home, filling me with worry about who he was with. It consumed me day and night. Then he'd come back as if nothing had happened. Then he decided to leave for good. He said he would live with friends. I didn't even know he had friends. At first, he kept in sporadic contact, calling once in a while, showing up for a Sunday lunch every 2 or 3 months. He said he was working as a salesman at an electronics store in downtown Austin. He seemed to be doing well for himself, always well-dressed, talking about plans to buy a motorcycle. I remember one Sunday when almost the whole family gathered for lunch. Michael, the oldest, was already married with 2 small children. Claire was pregnant with her first. The other kids were also in serious relationships. It was a scene that warmed my heart. Seeing my children grown up, following their paths, building their families, and then Jason arrived with a young woman. He introduced her as his girlfriend, Vanessa, a pretty girl with red-dyed hair and several tattoos on her arms. She seemed a bit older than him, maybe 25. During lunch, she spoke little, but I noticed how she looked at Jasona, mixture of fascination and fear that worried me. After everyone had left, Rose came to tell me something disturbing. "Dad, when I went to the bathroom, Vanessa followed me. She asked me if Jason was always like this. I asked, 'Like what?' And she said, 'Strange, cold.' Then she pulled up her sleeve and showed me bruises on her arm. She said he gets furious when she talks to other men, even if they're just customers at the store where she works." I went cold. So, Jason's aggressive behaviors had escalated to physical violence against women. I wanted to call him immediately, confront him, but Frank convinced me to wait and think it over. "Dad, you know how he is. He'll deny everything, say the girl is crazy, turn the situation around. Besides, she's an adult. She made her choice." He was right, of course, but before we could come up with a strategy, the situation resolved itself in the worst possible way. 2 weeks later, Jason showed up at the house in the middle of the night, visibly agitated. "I need to stay here for a few days," he announced, throwing a backpack on the couch. "What happened?" I asked, alarmed by his state. "I fought with Vanessa. We broke up. She's crazy, Dad. She makes up stories, says I'm going to hurt her, as if I'm some kind of monster." He spoke quickly, pacing the living room. There was something in his eyes that scared me. A feverish glint I had never seen before. "Did she call the police?" I asked, fearing the answer. He stopped pacing and looked at me with a coldness that chilled my soul. "It didn't come to that, but she threatened to. So I thought it was best to get out of there for a while. I let him stay, of course. What else could I do? He was my son, despite everything." In the days that followed, Jason maintained exemplary behavior at home. He helped with chores, spoke politely with his siblings, came home early every night. He seemed to be genuinely trying to start over. Until about 2 weeks later, we had an unexpected visit. 2 police officers knocked on the door asking for Jason. My heart nearly stopped. "He's wanted for questioning regarding an assault on Vanessa Oliveira," one of the officers informed, consulting a paper. The victim filed a complaint and provided this address as his possible whereabouts. Jason wasn't home at that moment. He had left early, saying he was going to look for a job. I explained this to the officers, who left a message that he should report to the police station as soon as possible. When I confronted Jason that night, his reaction was one of perfect indignation. "She's lying, Dad. I swear to God, I never laid a finger on her. She's the unstable one, always making up stories because she couldn't accept the breakup." He maintained this version even when he went to the station, accompanied by me and Paul, who always had more patience with his troubled brother. Apparently he convinced the authorities, as the case ended up not going forward. Vanessa dropped the charges days later for reasons we never knew for sure. This was just the first of many similar episodes we would face in the following years. Jason came and went from the house. He established a disturbing pattern of brief and stormy relationships, always with women who were vulnerable in some way, emotionally needy, with a history of abuse, often older or with young children. Once, he showed up with another girlfriend, Lucy, a young woman from Dallas who had a 3-year-old daughter. He announced they were living together in a small apartment in East Austin. Months later, we learned she had returned to her hometown, leaving everything behind after some kind of violent conflict. Another time it was Denise, a woman in her late 30s, divorced, who seemed completely enchanted by him. That relationship lasted almost a year, a record for Jason, but ended when she discovered he was embezzling money from the small clothing boutique she owned. Jobs followed the same pattern as relationships, brief, always ending in conflict, often with serious accusations: salesman, administrative assistant, office clerk, sales representative. Jason moved from one job to another, always with some story about unfair bosses, envious colleagues, mismanaged companies. "Why can't you ever keep a job, Jason?" I asked during one of the rare moments he seemed willing to talk civilly. "Because I wasn't born to be exploited, Dad," he answered with his typical smirk of superiority. "People are stupid, they don't recognize talent. I prefer to work for myself." Around this time I received a phone call. It was a lady from Dallas named Sue. She told me that Lucy, one of my son's ex-girlfriends, had had his child. The girl, Anna, was already 4 years old. This revelation of a granddaughter was something I never imagined. Then I remembered that young woman, Lucy, already had a daughter back then, Mrs. Sue said that Jason had beaten her badly. That's why she left Austin, and fear prevented her from telling him about the pregnancy, especially since she only found out later. Mrs. Sue was only calling because Lucy had recently passed away. "It was a terrible car accident," she told me, her voice choked with emotion, and Mrs. Sue was Lucy's grandmother. She was the one who had raised her granddaughter. With a trembling voice, she said she felt that Jason, as the father, and we, as the family, had the right to know about Anna's existence. She made sure to give me the address where the girl was living, describing a smart child with curious eyes. I asked so many questions. I wanted to know exactly what my granddaughter was like, and from everything she said I was very happy, as the little one was very loving and cried a lot when her mother passed. As soon as I hung up, I was stunned. At the first opportunity, I called my children, asked for their opinion. We decided to tell Jason. When we told him, his reaction was nothing. No surprise, no immediate questions about the girl, about her mother's accident, just a vacant stare. After a moment of silence, he finally said, "Dad, can you lend me some money? I'd like to go meet this girl in Dallas." He went, called me, and said the girl was beautiful and smart, just like her father. I was happy to know he was there with her. But my happiness was short-lived. He was back in Austin less than a week later. When I asked about Anna, he just shrugged. "She's fine. Her grandmother takes care of everything." There was no talk of responsibility, no mention of wanting to be a father to her. He had seen her, satisfied his curiosity, and moved on. That was Jason. A week passed. He came back with the idea of being an independent consultant. He now called himself that, without ever explaining exactly what consulting he provided or for whom. Sometimes he'd show up with money, other times he'd come asking to borrow some, always with some elaborate story about delayed payments or investment opportunities. He bought a motorcycle and, without a license, rode it all over town, always with a different pretty girl on the back. Jason lived off small scams, shady schemes, and the exploitation of vulnerable people. We found this out gradually, through stories that reached us from third parties, sometimes from the police. We learned he was involved in a scheme selling counterfeit goods. He was detained for a few hours but released for lack of concrete evidence. One day, an elderly woman showed up at our house in tears, saying that Jason had introduced himself as a real estate agent and had gotten her to sign papers transferring the house where she lived into his name. As collateral for a loan, he would arrange for her husband's medical treatment. "He seemed so trustworthy, so polite," the woman sobbed. "He said he was your son, Mr. Elliot, and that you were known in the community as an honest man." I was devastated. Using my name, my reputation, to deceive vulnerable people, that was a new level of low, even for Jason. Fortunately, with the help of Frank, who had finished law school and was working at a law firm, we managed to reverse the situation for the woman, proving there was coercion. Jason disappeared for months after that, knowing he was in trouble. The worst, however, was yet to come. When Jason was 27, we had a visit from a very young woman. She couldn't have been more than 20, with a baby a few months old in her arms. "My name is Tina," she introduced herself, visibly nervous. "This is Michael Jr., Jason's son. I came because he disappeared 3 months ago, and I have no way to support the baby on my own." It was like taking a punch to the gut. Another grandchild I didn't know about. This time, Jason knew he was a father and had abandoned the child. Tina's story was painfully familiar. She met Jason at a party. He was extremely charming and attentive at first. He promised her the world. When she got pregnant, everything changed. He became controlling, then aggressive, and finally, indifferent. When the baby was born, he stuck around for a few months, then disappeared with the little money she had saved. I looked at that baby, so tiny, so innocent, and I saw my son's features in him. At that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. Tina, I can't speak for Jason, but I am this boy's grandfather. I will help you in any way I can. From that day on, I included Tina and Mikey in our family. We didn't have much, but what we had, we shared. Michael and his wife were especially generous, helping with clothes, diapers, toys. Claire invited Tina to Sunday lunches, treating her like a sister. When Jason finally reappeared, almost 8 months later, he faced a cold reception from the entire family. For the first time, I saw my other children united in a solid front against their troubled brother. "You abandoned your son, Jason," said Michael, always the most direct. "That's unacceptable." "How am I supposed to know if the kid is even mine?" was Jason's cold reply. "She probably slept with half of Austin." The argument that followed was one of the worst we've ever had as a family. Harsh words were said, painful truths exposed. In the end, Jason stormed out, slamming the door, shouting that he would never come back. He came back, of course. He always came back when he needed something. Money, a place to stay, someone to co-sign a lease. But the family dynamic had changed. My other children no longer tolerated their brother's manipulations, didn't accept his excuses, didn't fall for his elaborate stories. And I remained torn between the love for my son and the recognition that he was a fundamentally dangerous person, a person incapable of love, incapable of feeling remorse, incapable of changing. The years went by, and at 29, Jason faced his most serious problem with the law to date. He was arrested for fraud, for scamming senior citizens using false documents. Frank, who was now a licensed attorney, managed to get him out after a few weeks, arguing procedural errors. "Why do you keep helping him?" I asked Frank afterward. My son sighed deeply before answering, "Because he's my brother, Dad, and because I know he didn't choose to be this way. It's like a disease he has. I can't hate him for something he can't control." That perspective gave me something to think about. For so long, I had alternated between seeing Jason as a victim of his condition and as a conscious manipulator who chose to do evil. The truth probably was somewhere in between. Meanwhile, little Mikey was growing up, already 2 years old, surrounded by the love of our family. Jason saw him only a few times, always showing an almost total disinterest in the child. The boy reacted with fear to his father, hiding behind Tina or me when he was around. "This kid doesn't even seem like my son," Jason commented once with sincere perplexity. "He's nothing like me." "Thank God for that," Claire retorted with sarcasm. The family conflicts because of Jason continued. But now there was a fundamental difference. My other children had matured, had their own families, their own lives. They understood their brother's condition better and knew how to handle his manipulations. They were no longer the vulnerable children he could easily deceive or intimidate. I had changed too. The years of struggle, of constant worry, of repeatedly dashed hopes had taught me to accept reality. My son was born different. It wasn't my fault, nor his. It was just the way it was. That didn't mean I had given up on him. I would never give up. And so, life went on, until we reached an age where your heart takes one of those blows that leaves you breathless. That's when Jason, my son, passed away. He was 38. It was in 2020. I remember it well. It was April, the 11th of April to be exact. A date that is seared into my memory like a branding iron. A motorcycle accident. It was on the I-35, they told me. Life plays such strange tricks. He who probably wouldn't have shed a single tear at my funeral, and I cried at his. And oh, how I cried, my God. Every tear was a piece of my heart running down my face. I loved that boy, you know. I loved him in my own way, with all my doubts and worries, but I loved him. And to see him go so soon, a piece of me went with him on that motorcycle, on that cold highway that April day. I know that maybe, for an outsider looking in, a crooked thought might arise, you know, something like, well, at least he won't cause any more trouble. But my son, a son is a son. The mischief, the heartaches, All of it is part of you, of your story with them. Never, ever will a real father look at the passing of a child and feel relief. There's no, "it's for the best," when you lose a piece of your own flesh and blood. It leaves a hole, a silence that echoes louder than any trouble he ever caused in his life. You carry the memories, good and bad, and the absence, oh, the absence gnaws at you from the inside, day after day. And I, at 69 years old, look back and see a life marked by love and pain, by joys and trials. A life that could have been different, easier perhaps, if one of my sons hadn't been born with that shadow in his heart. Elliot couldn't continue. The tears came, and his voice failed. The person who helped him finish his story was his daughter, Rose. "Dad can't talk about Jason without getting emotional. Telling this story is hard, but we feel it's important. For years we didn't have a name for what was wrong with Jason. We just knew he was different. It wasn't until a doctor finally used the word psychopathy that things started to make a twisted kind of sense. It wasn't that he chose to be cruel, it was that he couldn't feel things the way we did. No empathy, no guilt. The doctor told us that some people are just born without that compass inside them. The hardest part was that on the outside, he could be the most charming person you'd ever meet. That was his mask, and he wore it so well. He fooled so many people. But we, his family, we knew what was behind it. A genuine inability to feel compassion or consider the feelings of others. What makes this disorder so complex is the contrast between appearance and essence. Far from being sinister figures easily identified, psychopaths often possess a special charm, sharp intelligence, and refined social skills. They present themselves as captivating, trustworthy, and helpful people, building a perfect facade that hides their manipulative nature. Behind this social mask operates a calculating mind that sees relationships only as a means to an end. Without the moral break provided by guilt or remorse, people with this disorder can lie, cheat, and harm others without hesitation, as long as it serves their goals of obtaining power, advantages, or simply amusement at others' expense. Psychopathy manifests in different intensities, from mild forms to extremely severe cases. While some psychopaths may limit themselves to everyday manipulations and minor transgressions, more severe cases can evolve into predatory criminal behavior. In the family environment, as we saw with Jason, the impact is devastating. Psychopathic children show early signs that confuse and alarm parents. Cruelty to animals, a lack of genuine emotional bonding, calculated manipulation of siblings, and a disturbing ability to simulate normality when convenient. For families like Elliot's, the challenge is twofold: to protect themselves from destructive behaviors and, simultaneously, to deal with the unconditional love they feel for someone who is fundamentally incapable of reciprocating that affection in the same way. This emotional contradiction creates a particular kind of suffering that only those who live it can fully understand. My father can't talk about Jason without getting emotional. This month marks 5 years since he passed, and this is the time of year when he's most fragile. Dad now takes care of this house with so much love. My brother Frank has been living here with him for about 3 years, ever since he separated from Teresa. It's been a great support for both Dad and Frank. As for Dad, he only had one love in his life. After Mom was gone, several ladies from the church and the community tried to get close to him. It's no secret that Mr. Elliot, even at 69, is still a handsome and respected man in our neighborhood. But as he always says, there's no room in my heart for anyone else. Between delivering bread and raising 6 kids, Mom and he built a story that no one else can fit into. Our children, Dad's grandkids, love to visit Grandpa on the weekends. The house fills up again with laughter, running, with life. But we all notice how Dad sometimes looks at the door, as if expecting Jason to show up at any moment. It's a habit he hasn't been able to break, that state of alert, of waiting, that formed during all those years of dealing with the surprises my brother always brought. Technology has brought a new joy to Dad. Michael taught him how to use a smartphone, and now he has video calls with Anna, Jason's daughter in Dallas. Poor thing, she's a girl who suffered a lot, losing both her parents in tragic accidents. She's 19 now, a beautiful and studious young woman, studying to be a nurse in college. She has her older sister, who supports her, since her great-grandmother, Mrs. Sue, has passed away. My dad and Anna have never met in person yet, but Dad keeps a photo she sent from her high school graduation in a frame on the shelf. From their talks, from the kindness she shows, thank God she didn't take after her father at all. The same happened with Mikey, Tina's son, with Jason. He's 16 today. He's a calm, affectionate teenager, completely different from his father. He comes here every month, spends Sundays with Grandpa. Dad always comments, with a mixture of relief and gratitude, that the shadow that was in Jason's heart didn't pass on to his children. The Ford van Gertie is still in the garage, retired, but Dad won't get rid of it for anything. Sometimes I see him sitting inside, quietly, as if he's reliving the bread deliveries, the cold mornings, the building of our family. I think what my dad wanted to say, before the emotion took over, is that despite everything, despite all the suffering we went through with Jason, he still misses his son. It's a love that doesn't make sense to anyone looking from the outside, but it defines who my father is. A man capable of loving unconditionally, even without receiving anything in return, even knowing his son wasn't capable of returning that love. Now at 69, I sit in this old house where the laughter of 6 children once echoed. Jason's been gone 5 years now, but the question remains, could I have done something different? Have you ever loved someone knowing they couldn't return that love? Have you ever faced the truth that your child was born different, through no one's fault? I want to hear your story, the wounds and lessons from your own family. Please leave a comment, share with me and this community, because it's in our most painful stories that we find the strength to go on. And if this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel to explore more moving human stories with me.